So we have a panel of quite prominent people with some real life experience, also experience about Azure. One full-time employee at Microsoft, and a panel of MVPs, and one also RD. Lots of real Azure experience. And so really we can talk for weeks about Azure among ourselves. Like we could really literally, if we start now, it'll be weeks before we run out of topics. But that's not the point here. The point is more, what are your questions? What are you thinking about? How do I migrate to the cloud? How do I choose compute? What storage method? Blah, blah, blah. I don't know. We're going to start up here.
I work in OMS and
Is that on?
log analytics and applications insight, and I'm wondering about OMS versus applications insight. Can I start using applications insights instead of OMS now?
Oh, that sounds like a question for you, right?
Yes,
Karl.
I'd like to take that. Excellent point. OMS log analytics is basically just a huge sinkhole of stuff. You can connect any kind of log type of data in it. You can get any data source in there, and basically the same query language is now used and is available for both the new log analytics OMS side and the App Insight. So those folks who've been using here App Insight for a while, those scripts totally work the same way. If you have an existing log analytics query that you built yourself, there is some manual or some semi-automatic steps that you can do where you can kind of upgrade your whole log analytics workspace into this new one, so that you can actually, they're still separate, so you can have separate application insights. What's the name there?
Application insights.
Is it instance?
It's a service instance, right?
Yeah. Yes. You can have a separate application insight instance, and you can run your telemetry queries from there and your OMS queries in the log analytics, or you can even pipe your application insight data to the OMS side if you just want to have one place to run these things. But
yeah,
that's like the overview intro. Does anybody have any?
No.
Anything to add?
This is a fascinating space, and it's a fast-moving and changing space. And there's this whole, I think we need to comment also on the monitor aspects of Azure that's kind of relevant as well. You wanted to?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. I think the question is whether to choose App Insight, Application Insight or OMS, right? Like people getting confused to pick one over the other. Application Insight is quite in-depth. It's more of a, there's a famous concept called APM, right? Like where you dig down into the code level. You wanted to figure out whether the exceptions are handling, like, what function is throwing the exception in your web app, and those kind of very deep level analytics, you go for App Insight. But if you wanted to give like a really high level, like, logs, and you want to give some dashboards and stuff like that, then you use OMS. And I think they're trying to bring it closer as much as possible. Like Karl was saying, the query language, it used to be different between these two products, but now it's same. So I think, like for example, in our case, like where we are running a platform and we need to know everything about the platform. So probably go for like a solution like App Insight, where we need much more visibility into end-to-end what's happening. But for small projects or something you're doing, like like a OMS could be sufficient.
Yeah. So let's roll over into monitor as well. I'm not sure that everybody knows exactly what monitor is and what position that has. Would someone like to intro monitor? It comes back to you. Yes, that's fine.
So Azure Monitor is basically a one aggregator for all of the different diagnostic logs of specific Azure resource diagnostic tools.
Yeah.
Or, for example, in storage, there is diagnostic tools about basically how many times has it been accessed, what type of queries have been therein, what's the data transfer rate, etc., etc. VMs have a lot more diagnostics available, but they are all queryable through the Azure Monitor. And Azure Monitor's idea is to kind of wrap all of these together so that you don't have to, in your own application, basically design. If you have 5 different Azure services, you don't have to design 5 different ways of calling telemetry or diagnostics.
Exactly right. And the interesting thing is that how many companies have used many Azure services over several or even many years now, and we haven't really ever had any good insights into how the services themselves are performing. There's an SLA and they're supposed to be performing all the time. But what if we have some really strange behavior? We would probably, hopefully, I mean, we'd like to exclude platform issues. Let's say you're using the service bus. Until just recently, for all the years up until now, companies have put that as their central messaging system inside of their business critical applications, but literally without any insight into how the service itself is performing. And that's the gap that Monitor is now trying to fill for all the Azure services, right? For all of them, so that you'll be able to literally go to a dashboard and say, here's the diagnostics for my application insights, and here's the diagnostics for the VMs, the service bus, the storage, and all the stuff that I'm running. You wanted to add to that?
Yeah, like I think across Azure, every service they need to expose certain metrics. So
Yeah.
if you look at VMs, the VM should expose metrics like typical performance counters like CPU, memory, etc. And Azure Monitor is a one single place where you can react on those metrics.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to say like your CPU usage is 80% for last 30 minutes and you wanted to alert somebody, then you can have one place, you can go to Azure Monitor and pick up any metrics available for each platform.
Yeah.
And you just
The reaction piece is one of the keys here, that you can actually any diagnostic message which comes into Monitor is a blob of JSON. It's an event with properties from some source about something happened, what have you. If you can find it inside of your diagnostic logs in Monitor, you can specify an alert for that kind of message. Performance degradation on your VM or something, I don't know, right? It doesn't matter. If you can find it in the metrics, you can create an alert for that. Send out an email to a group or to an individual. Send out I think text message is still in the US only?
Yes.
Yes, text message, but webhook, right? So if you have a webhook, you can do whatever you want. You're good. Yeah, pretty cool. All right, next question. Should we move on? We've covered monitoring real quick. Any thoughts? Otherwise, we'll just do random topic. You need to be down here right now. You
Nice
tried.
try.
You tried, but no. Here's another full-time employee coming down to the stage. Good morning.
Good day, Magnus.
Good morning.
It is my time. It's only 7:30 a.m.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a really, really narrow ledge to hang on to. So we're now we have App Insights here. So how about transitioning over to messaging? Any thoughts on messaging? What do you do for messaging? Anyone? Which scheme do you use? Like, this is a typical Swedish audience. Any questions on messaging at all? So, messaging.
Who uses Swagger?
Ooh.
Who uses OpenAPI? Who realizes that we renamed Swagger to be OpenAPI about a year ago? So
It does.
yes, Swagger sounds much, much cooler. Unfortunately, for legal reasons, we weren't allowed to use Swagger as the name anymore. Swagger is now the name for the tooling. Swagger UI, Swagger Editor, the tool's owned by SmartBear. But officially, the specification is now OpenAPI. It's managed under the Linux Foundation as an open source because SmartBear were generous enough to give away the IP of the specification to the Linux Foundation. There is now a new version of what used to be Swagger, which is now OpenAPI called V3. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. We now support webhooks, we support linking, we support multiple servers, we support parameterized servers, we support much better descriptions of request and response. If you've used JSON schema in your Swagger, we now support any of and all of So there's lots more that you can do with it. Tooling is still coming along. There is Swagger Editor, does now work with V3. Swagger UI, I'm not sure. I think so also.
Okay.
And Microsoft are working hard on implementing OpenAPI v3 also.
Okay. So where do you see this going now? Like the longer projection of API management. Everywhere, APIs everywhere for everyone? Everyone should have one?
The API economy is huge. I mean, I think Salesforce said that they do 50% of the revenue from APIs as a product. So, I mean, the industry isn't going away. Companies like Stripe and Twilio, that is all they do, right? So the API economy is huge. Big businesses are starting to realize that APIs are a critical part of their infrastructure. And API management is just a tool that lets you get into that space quicker.
Yeah.
It gives you that developer portal, the discovery. It gives you the stuff like rate limiting and all that kind of stuff. And it just makes life much easier to get into that space.
Yeah, definitely. And it's grown up real quickly. I mean, it's and more is happening. And it's interesting how central that is. If you look at it from my talk, the whole management layer of all Azure services, including the management of managing Azure services, it's all of that is APIs.
Yeah.
All of it.
I mean, at Microsoft, we had an initiative from a few years ago which was called One API, which was an attempt within the company to try and create a standard way of building APIs within the company. And we produced some guidelines that we shared. Sorry, my alarm to wake up in the morning.
Good.
Yeah, it's about time to wake up. So we shared a bunch of guidelines. They're called the One API guidelines. They're on the Microsoft GitHub repo.
Yep.
And it's kind of what we try and follow within the company when building APIs. Just a set of conventions that layers over the top of HTTP. And there are review boards. There's an Office API review board. There's a Azure API review board. And we sit down, and when the various teams come together and say, look, we have this API that we want to put out, and we sit down and we'll go through them and try and make sure that they are consistent. I mean, there's a lot of consistency brought through the ARM proxy, so that a lot of those Azure APIs work the same way. And then also on the Office side, you've got the Graph API, which has brought together all kinds of APIs under a single umbrella to try and provide a consistent developer experience.
Where do we go for public guidelines and best practices on, like, I want to create an API. I want to make sure I do it right. Where do I go?
Well, the first place to do is to read RFC 72, 30, 31, 32,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
33, 34,
Everybody will do
35,
that. Yeah.
right?
So how many pages is that? A gazillion?
It took them 6 years to update the old RFC 2616.
Yeah, that sounds
and
fantastic.
they didn't change anything.
It sounds like riveting, right?
But
It's a nail biter, really.
It truly is the place that tells you what to do. And yes, okay, it's painful to read, but it is the source of truth when it comes to building distributed applications on the web.
Practicals, as in I'm building my API. Am I doing it right? How do I know?
Well, there are a lot of best practice type documentation on the web with regards to that. There's some great books out there, like the RESTful Services Cookbook that was out a number of years ago. O'Reilly has a revision to the original RESTful Web Services that Mike Amundsen contributed and Leonard Richardson. There is the Microsoft API guidelines.
Yep.
There's lots of resources
Because
out there.
as with everything, of course, you want to do it right. But once you have a consumer of your API, you're kind of locked in. It's going to be much more difficult to actually change your API after you actually have people who have integrated against them. Right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. There are a variety of different approaches to try and ease that pain, and the more that you can encourage your client developers to build things that are reactive to the responses that they get, the more you can make changes in the future. There's certain things that we've got some bad habits in the industry of doing things like, well, these are the 3 status codes that I'm going to return. And people sit down and they hard code, well, these are the 3 status codes that I have to handle. And then you end up with a situation, well, I'd really like to add rate limiting. Well, that's 429, that's another status code, and you break your client, right?
Right.
So trying not to couple on expectations and assumptions as to what the server is going to do will lead you down a path of building more flexible clients that can handle change over time.
Very interesting. All right. Thank you. Questions about anything? Yes.
I was thinking about the IoT stuff. I was thinking about the IoT stuff. Do you have any idea where these things will come into general availability that you were talking about?
Which ones? Edge?
Yeah, Edge, SDKs and stuff for that.
That's a typical Microsoft question, but they will not answer it.
Let's take it offline would be the typical answer.
All right.
I think a private preview you can expect, public preview, sorry, you can expect in for Edge in probably before end of this year. That calendar year.
It's private preview.
It's private
now.
preview, very limited customers. So
Very
we're
limited
using
private
it
preview.
and it's not ready to go public. But I think in a few months maximum. General availability will be, I don't even know, but I think maybe first half of next calendar year, something like that. The thing that is sure is that the billing model will be public with public preview. So that's an important thing. Then the device provisioning service that I mentioned, that one is public available. So the GA, I don't have an idea as well. IoT Hub is already a long time GA. Okay.
All right. There's a question up there. Brilliant. Thank you. Hang on. Microphone.
Hi, everyone. This question is to every one of you. I have been in IT from quite a long time, and I have few friends who work for Azure. Few work for banking applications, few work for insurance company. So when I had a discussion with my friends past day ago, and I said about we're trying to move into Azure in my current organization, what about you guys? He said that they are into banking and they hesitate to move into cloud because they don't want their customer data to be on the cloud. So they see it as a security threat or something like that. So what's your comment on it?
Oh wow, that is a big question. Who wants to do the security thing?
It seems to me that I'm the only one that's awake. But quick answer, wait for my session, which is the next one.
Good one.
Well, last year I think last year we had Collector Bank talking here about how they do banking applications, basically everything in the cloud. There are, I think Klarna is also a public cloud reference, not Azure.
Yeah.
Some other public cloud. I don't know any of those. And the notion of security really comes down to the trust. And whenever I go to a customer, regulated customer or not, the finance is actually a good example because there are some ways where they can get more information than other customers from Microsoft related to the auditing and all of that. So there are different agreements that financial customers can do with Microsoft than other industries. But in general, for every industry that I work with who handle any type of personal data, maybe a year or two ago, I still had to work a lot on that notion, talk the whole Microsoft security story, the whole trust story. Now that everybody has to do their GDPR, so European Union General Data Protection, everything related to that, finding out, discovering all of that, places where we handle customer data. Do you know that if you want to be fully compliant, you basically, if a customer requests from you that they want to be removed from your service, you actually had to export and delete all of the data, including, for example, IAS logs, every data that has any notion about your customer in any of your backups, all of that has to be removed in order to be fully 100% compliant with the GDPR.
I don't think anyone can do that.
Yes, so that's crazy. So basically, everybody's just biting nails, waiting, trying to legalize that, all of that. There's no magical GDPR product that will help us there, but because all of that notion and all of that work and all of those new GDPR black box businesses that handle everything for you, all of that money going into that, all of that work going into that right now, Azure is starting to look very good indeed for all of those customers.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are a couple of general things, general points to make. I'll answer that in part myself as well. Generally speaking, and this doesn't give you much, but generally speaking, companies that start using a good cloud platform, for instance Azure, right, feel over time that their security enablement, it goes up, not down. It doesn't make them feel more insecure as they start using the cloud more. The contrary, they feel more secure. And to go really geeky technical, the features that are now available for some of the services that weren't there for many years, the features it's just increasing number of features all the time. You would think something like Azure Storage, well, that's done, it's implemented. You can store blobs and tables and queues, and that's done, right? Hell no. It just keeps coming with new features all the time. So just as an example of security, the things that you can do today, which you couldn't just a while ago, is you can literally have you can turn off the public endpoint to your storage account, attach it to a VNet, so you have your storage account service attached to your virtual network in Azure with the endpoint only inside the virtual network. It's encrypted by default, and you can also now supply your own key for the encryption. So you bring your own key to the storage. It's connected to your virtual network, so you can have, let's say you're doing your backups, right? You want to have backup storage. Every company does. Compliance, we need to have that. And then including that with such things as cold storage helps you with the money, but it doesn't speak to security. But literally, I would say that any company would probably hit all the marks on compliance and legal if you have that sort of setup where you it's our key, it's only accessible through our network, and you can set up access. You can have access control whenever anything is accessed. You can have alerts. You can, I mean, every feature you would need for compliance and security, they are there today. They weren't there like a couple of years ago, right? You have a comment on that?
I think the reality is it's a fear of change.
Yeah.
But if you took the people from those financial companies and you took them for a tour around the Microsoft data centers, they would quickly realize that the security in those data centers is way beyond what they have in their own data centers. We as Azure, in the Azure engineering, we do production servicing. I can't access production systems from a regular laptop. We're provisioned a special laptop that is specifically locked down, and we can't do anything on it other than access those production systems. So that level of security is just something that companies can't afford to do independently.
Yeah.
And companies like Microsoft, who are in the business of providing those third-party clouds, have to provide that level of security.
Absolutely
So
right.
over time, what tends to happen is one customer in the financial industry goes, yeah, okay, let's do this, let's move. And they become the reference customer. And all the other banks go, oh, well, they did it, so I guess it's okay. And it will change.
It will. That's a big area, a big topic. New question?
Another question. Yeah, so I'm creating an SQL server on my account, on my subscription, and I want to create it for a development environment. So I lock it down with a firewall setting. Then I create some PaaS services, let's say an app service, and it gets exposed. What options do I have to lock the PaaS services down to my development environment only? Outside, I mean, I don't want public access to it.
So I have now like 2.5 hour session on security altogether, all of these questions included. So I'll try to be brief. So great question. Now on the SQL DB side, there are as well options of actually exposing it in a VNet. So you can actually log it in the VNet. You can do everything that's in the VNet. There you probably have more connectivity options, more monitoring options, better options of actually managing that security than you would have if you would go to a regular hoster, or if you would go to your own data center. Basically, you can have Network Watcher, basically Wireshark, record everything that's happening inside your VNet. So all of the past services that have VNet support are very much monitorable from that side. We can basically see everything that's in there. You can actually put a application gateway, different gateway, application gateway, which is basically the layer 7 appliance, a solution that can actually listen to and or modify any type of application layer networking data there. So you can do stuff like intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, stuff like that. And if you just want to have it by yourself, well, the quickest answer, of course, if it's within the VNet, the easiest answer is close all of the external connections with a network security group, and just hook up a new VPN gateway and connect to it with maybe even your own signed point-to-site VPN, and then you're good to go. That's only for you.
Yeah. So web applications are attachable to the VNet, and then you have all the virtual machines inside the VNet, and then now services, storage, SQL, are starting to attach to that concept itself, as in you can turn off the public endpoint. There's no access other than the VNet.
Yes, but is that enough for a security conscious customer if they know that it's there?
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Honestly,
hijacking your question.
Right. Honestly, it should be, right? Shouldn't it? When you shut it off, it's one of those things that has fascinated me. Let's say you're running a virtual machine. You're running your application on a virtual machine in Azure, and Azure is managing the machine, the resource into which your OS runs, and then your application on top of that. You can literally shut off in the Azure layer, in the resource layer, shut off all communication paths to that machine. You can have a machine which you cannot connect to at all, remote desktop, everything is shut down until you actually open up an access to it, open up a port. You specify that in the resource layer in Azure, in the platform. Then you can start to communicate with that machine. So literally you can shut everything off, and when everything is off, it comes down to the trust. Do we trust Microsoft, in this case, to actually adhere to this? There is no way in, and nobody will be looking at the machine or looking into the machine. Well, that's trust and compliance. And Microsoft needs to be compliant and trustworthy. If they're not trustworthy, they are nothing. So I think we're good at that point, honestly.
And really, all of this kind of Azure-related any security control that you put in from the Azure portal side or the role-based access control and all of those sides, any monitoring that you put in, everything that you do there is useless the minute you actually, inside your application, inside your web app, create a custom key value pair connection or a custom identity that you share to possibly a malicious user. So you always had to think of this kind of end-to-end security in there as well.
Yeah, and then everything is connected to your Active Directory as well, so you can have controlled your access through your own Active Directory.
Yes, then also like one key thing is that there's lots of Azure services, not all of them supports VNet. So there's certain services where you need to do like, I'm blocking every connection except from this one IP. And some of them might not support it easily. Like you might need to write quite a lot of custom code to enable those scenarios. So if you want, for some reason, like all of those services which don't support it by default, they are meant to be more public facing. So if you want for some reason lock them, it might be pretty hard. So then it might make sense to use something else if you absolutely need the locking down. So that's a sad part. And if you face that kind of issues, go to user voice, find the issue which says, I want VNet support, and vote it up. Like literally. Like if you do that, there's a very good possibility that he or somebody else from the team will really go and fix it. Like if the user voice has more than 300 votes, I think they will fix it within 6 months.
It's
I mean,
funny because it's true.
Yes, that's a real promise. There is very few people who do user voice voting. So if all of you to go now and let's go to the API management user voice and let's put let's say we want to support something crazy and all of you give all of your votes to it. He will hear about it on Monday. Like literally.
He
will be at the meeting like we need to do this. Why? It got so many votes on user voice.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how it works.
Literally.
So that's what happened with the sharks and lasers years ago.
Sorry?
What happened with the sharks and lasers years ago?
Yes, it's literally true. Actually, that Microsoft does look at user voice and use that so much.
Just a quick thing on the VNet. I'm not sure, but I think for a lot of services you have to go to a more expensive tier, right? So that's one of the challenges you can have, especially for dev and so on, that it costs more just because you need that VNet thing, even if you don't consume a lot. So that's something that is unfortunate.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I can do it, but yeah, you're right. It's a bit of a chore. So, great question. Another question. Perfect. We have 10 more minutes, so it's cool.
Yeah, it's regarding Azure and Azure Stack.
Oh.
What kind of feature sets can we get into the
Stack? Yeah.
That's Stack.
So remember user voice? We talked about it just now. Well, it's of course Microsoft's strategy to put as many services and features as they possibly can down to the stack. Roadmap-wise, come on, nobody knows. And it's a priority thing. The things that people ask for the most are the things that will be. When is API management going to be on the? It doesn't actually matter for API management. It can be anywhere, right?
Well, yes, we have a variety of different solutions for accessing on-premise type resources with API management. It took them a rather long time to actually get Azure Stack out there, so we haven't had that conversation yet as to when we will be on Azure Stack, because, well, nobody knew when it was actually going to arrive. But it has arrived.
Now we're talking local, our own internal APIs, and we are an enterprise, and we want to have an API management on top of that.
Yes. The stock response to I want API management on-prem is tell us your scenarios. It goes back to the user voice thing. Our PMs have tons and tons of work to do, so therefore what they do is they use user voice as and our roadmap as a prioritization mechanism to decide what we should work on next. And tell us what you need, and if enough customers tell us what they want and we think we can actually implement it, we will do it. It's not there yet because, again, it goes back to the question about finance being uncomfortable, banks uncomfortable putting things in the cloud. A lot of the reason for on-prem is because people don't want to change. And the reality is we are changing. People are moving stuff out into the cloud because it is more secure. So you have to ask the question, why are people wanting to put stuff on-prem? If it is for security reasons, maybe that's not the right reason. So to be honest, we're sort of dragging our heels on that particular topic because we think that it's just a case of people have cold feet about going to the cloud, and over time that requirement is going to be less and less. But maybe we're wrong, and if enough customers tell us we're wrong, then we'll change our minds.
If I had $1 for every time I had that conversation with a customer, oh my God, right? it's funny because it's true.
Isn't there a compliance issue as well besides
Go ahead.
security?
Sorry, you said?
I mean, when it comes to moving to cloud, isn't there a compliance issue besides security? Because, for example, you cannot, if you're in Germany, you cannot move your data outside Germany.
We built a version of Azure in Germany.
Two
Well,
data
would you
centers.
be building version of Azure for every region?
We built a version of Azure in China.
Okay.
We built a version of Azure specifically for US government.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are multiple different ones. You know, this is hearsay, this is not official, but what I've heard is we built a data center in Germany and then lots of companies who are in Germany aren't using it.
Okay.
Yeah, which is weird. It's really weird. I want to talk about architecture. I want to talk about event sourcing and architecture because I thought your session was incredibly fascinating. How many people are looking at event sourcing and that sort of thing? Have you several? Have you thought about separating your queries and your edits, updates, deletes, whatever? Are you doing it? You are. Okay, cool. So how strong is that movement? I'm sure you're facing a lot of despair there. Companies or developers want to go and do a change, and how tough is that road?
Well, as I said yesterday, it took us as a company 2 years to switch from a pure entity-based mindset to an event-driven mindset. And to be honest, the majority of developers are still kind of, it's not about to be used, it's about having fear to change. I second.
We come back to
Darrel
that again.
when he says we have fear to change. Point is, thinking in events is actually simpler because in the real world, events occurred again and again and again. So a few developers started to get the power of events, and the majority of them kind of affiliated to domain-driven design, the domain-driven design community, which was the first one to start trying to implement those concepts. I think that Azure is going to give a lot of momentum to event-driven programming, and Event Grid is a great way to enable this kind of mindset change, because in order to use event, actually I still haven't used Event Grid for a production project since it was released. It GA'd less than 2 months ago in August, but since all it gets to all you need to start using Event Grid is you have to define your events as plain C# classes, have them serialized to JSON and post it to an URL. I can't imagine a simpler way to start playing with event-based architectures.
Something changed in my storage account or what have you. That's something that's already occurred, and now there's code executing as a result of that. And as you said, events then it's very natural, and it's very close to natural language when you talk about these things.
Actually, I think IoT has been a great facilitator, because we started to get that we turn on devices, we turn off devices, we click button, and we have been getting that we click buttons since the VB1 days, okay? But it's IoT that kind of triggered a mindset,
Good word,
the change of the mindset.
I think one of the challenges that mentally people have to get over is the whole eventually consistent model.
Yeah.
Because we're used to this warm and fuzzy transactional world where it's, when I do this, this is guaranteed to happen within one, two-phase commit transaction. Whereas you've got to get used to the eventual consistent type world in the CQRS style.
And that's a big mind shift change. Yeah, it's difficult to wrap your head around. Definitely. Oh. We pause.
Yes, that's true. We need to learn, and I think we also need to educate our stakeholders, because we have teach them the other paradigm for a while. So we need to teach them as well to think in this way.
I'd start asking them whether they do use Facebook, because every time they do like a post, they are actually only changing the user interface. They are looking at an updated UI. Still, the change in the database
hasn't even happened yet. Hasn't happened yet.
So we do live in an eventually consistent world. We should kind of become more aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Facebook thing is a great example, and I use it a lot. But even for internal systems, that is not really applicable. So you need to, I think, educate them in the way.
That's a bit of a challenge.
The most significant example I've heard of, and this actually came from Greg Young, because we used to drink a lot of beer together, but is a bank teller. You walk up to a bank machine and you go and withdraw money from a bank. It goes and it checks to see whether or not you have that amount of money in your bank. Now let's think for a minute. What would happen if you didn't have enough? What would happen if it didn't check and it just recorded you are this person and you withdrew that amount of money? How many of the transactions that occur actually fail because there isn't enough? It's such a tiny, tiny percentage. And compensating for it is really not that difficult to do, right? It's like, well, a lot of people have overdraft type scenarios, so it's not a problem. Or worst case scenario is you get a letter from the bank going, hey, you're really, but you have an established relationship with that bank. They know how to contact you.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. So why is that transaction being slowed down while the bank teller communicates halfway around the world to go and check your particular bank account? It's really not necessary, even for something as significant as a financial withdrawal.
I agree. And as a matter of fact, that has happened to me. I have as everyone else, I have a banking account and I have a credit account. So I use my credit card, we're usually fine. But honestly, I've been able to overdraw on my bank account. And literally the bank called me up once and said, you went over, like your bank account is now minus. Like, how is that even possible? It's in the world of this, right? Eventual consistency. I made a withdrawal and then they actually checked and, oh crap, he didn't actually have that money on the account. And that can literally happen in the real world in banking. So that's eventual consistency right there. Otherwise, that would never have happened. And at that point, I have to confess, I was a little bit, upset, because honestly, I thought in, my naivety, I thought that couldn't happen, because obviously they check my account before they actually accept my withdrawal. And turns out that's not the case always.
How many different transactions within business systems do we just kind of assume, oh, well, yes, this needs to be consistent, though, let's throw it in a transaction.
Yeah.
And we're building, distributed systems over HTTP and microservices and stuff, and you really can't do distributed transactions over HTTP. Lots of people keep trying, but it wasn't ever built to do that. So we need to take a different perspective, and as you say, we have to unlearn many years of learning to say, okay, well, maybe this really doesn't need to be in a transaction, because the challenge with transactions is they require that shared state where all of a sudden we run into performance problems. And that's one of the reasons why CQRS is awesome for performance.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely true, and then there's all these things that we know for truth. Like there are expressions and idioms like you can take that to the bank. It's an expression, like right, and we have to like unlearn all these things, which is interesting. So it's could be a long path to go to that scenario, but it's well worth the effort. Yeah. The conversation that you have when you're talking about event-driven architectures, or what phrase you want to use, the conversations you have in the project room for building something it's very natural. You talk about something that happened. You always use past tense. That had already happened. Now what's going to happen? Now what do we do? That happened. Now what do we do? It's a really, really natural language way of going about things. And it's funny that we haven't come to this point sooner. I wonder why it took us so long to come here.
Me either. And you might want to have a look at an analysis technique, which is called event storming.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is great because you actually design a system starting with events. You basically talk to stakeholders, and in order to create this elicitation process, and where you extract events from their sentences, actually.
Yeah.
And
You
yeah,
literally
it's amazing.
You literally put like 5 people in a room, stakeholders, no chairs, they can't sit down, have a meeting for 30 minutes and talk about the things that happen in the business. And then you just write down that as events, and here you go, backlog. It's actually not more difficult than that.
And I'd like to just address another issue, which will come up if you have this conversation about building an API that does event sourcing, is, you send commands, right? And in the last 7 or 8 years, REST APIs has become a thing, and one of the pieces of guidance that you will hear all the time is you should only have nouns in your URLs. There should be no verbs. So as soon as somebody comes along and says, well, I want to do a command, they go, oh, well, that's not RESTful. Okay, send them to me, and I will explain to them why that is complete and utter BS. It is not a problem creating a URL that has a command in it that you want to do a post to. That does not violate any of the REST constraints whatsoever. So
that's exactly the actions in the management API of Azure. VM.
Yes.
VM URI, the whole address to the VM /start /stop. That's exactly that.
So the key is, don't do a get / some unsafe operation, because then your HTTP method contradicts the word that is in your URL. But if you use post is, there's no guarantee whether it's a safe or an unsafe, so there's absolutely no problem putting an action type of verb in that URL there. Just don't do it with get or delete, or like if you are deleting, use the HTTP method that makes sense. If there isn't an HTTP method that corresponds to what you're doing, fine, use post and put an action there. So.
Makes sense. We have time for additional questions, actually, and then we'll take a break. We're all tapped out. Like, everybody knows everything about Azure now.
I can do one.
Yes.
Something we haven't talked about at this conference, I kind of think we're missing it a bit, is the storage services and updates going on there. And very recently, we've had Azure table storage. We've had that for a long time, and now we've got a table API for Cosmos DB, formerly known as Document DB, and that's causing some confusion. I was wondering if people could had any experience on how to clarify that.
Oh, that felt like a hot potato. Timo, you're...
Use Gremlin. It's awesome. The graph query language is fabulous.
So if you're currently looking into the documentation, which I can do a lot, which is very funny. When you go through documentation, you're like, oh yeah, that's outdated. The best thing you can do is you can always make a GitHub issues and somebody will go and fix it. Or if you are a really, really good person, you go and open a pull request and fix it yourself. Good job. So there is two APIs, and they kind of do the same thing. But if you think like, what's the difference between the storage service and the Cosmos DB? Cosmos DB is meant to be multi-regional. It's meant for distributed huge systems. If you think a table service, it's kind of meant for the same thing, but it's not really meant for multi-regional in that sense.
Exactly.
So the most question is, are you global or not? If you're really building global thing, you can get way better performance on Cosmos DB. If you're building something that sits on one data center, you're probably totally fine with table services currently. If you're looking at the APIs and their client SDKs and everything, they're currently merging. So my strong opinion would be one of them will die, and it's not going to be Cosmos DB. Yes.
But
that might take like
very far away.
It will probably take like 6 years or something like that.
The concept
and die might mean that they just migrate to under a service and they rename it, which happens all the time.
Yeah.
Like I mean, names and services change every damn year or something. Like I don't even know the names anymore. I'm like, the thing that was called web apps, I think it's now called Azure App Service Web App or something. I still call it Azure Websites because it makes way more sense. But the marketing guys are like, oh yeah, we need a new thing. Let's rename it. It's completely new. Like Document DB came, Cosmos DB. We still call it Document DB.
Funny thing there, for instance, like the split, the division has happened in another service, Service Bus, that had several concepts under the umbrella of Service Bus that never actually belonged together in the first place. There was the queues and topics, and then there was the actual messaging, the Service Bus, right? They weren't actually the same thing. So now if you just look in the documentation, and if you look at things, it's now called topics. It's not called Service Bus topics anymore. So they've moved that out. And if you translate that over to storage was one of the actual very, very first services in Azure, and it was announced having like the only way to communicate between the at that time web application website hosted in a web front end and the worker role in the back end in the hosted service, as it was called. Now the cloud service. Thank you. Sorry, cloud service. The only way to communicate was to use put a message on a queue, right? So storage came out with queues and tables and blob storage. If Microsoft were to create, like, oh, we need a storage service, we need some service, they would never put those three in the same service, in the same service instance today, if that was recreated today. Never in a million years. Because those three things actually do not belong together at all. There's three completely different things. But so migrations, that stuff, it will happen. I could actually see your point there. There is a case for saying all of a sudden, nobody said that at Microsoft, and please do not quote us on anything like that. But there's a case to be had for actually saying just one day, you know what, the storage table service that you knew, it's now the table service, and we've migrated you all over to Cosmos DB. It doesn't mean anything to you. You're not doing anything differently. You're doing the same thing, the same API. Nothing broke. Nothing changed. You're just now on the Cosmos service. Nobody cares.
I think it's one of those things that we have to take into account when we start designing things.
Yeah.
That you have to design for change, and because things will change. I mean, in the traditional enterprise world, was easy. You had your own data center, and if you wanted to keep it running on that non-supported version, you did. It was your responsibility, and you could migrate whenever you want. Now it happens that you start building an application for now, you finish that project, but you have to know that in a few, probably it's years, because they always pre-announce and so on, but there might be breaking changes coming up, or that one service that you use now might have been replaced and so on. And that's why we have to take that into account in design of your solutions actually as well.
So how many enterprise grade, huge mission critical services running in data centers around the world do we think exist that you can't even make a change to because you don't know how to do it anymore? Like it's forgotten. It's so arcane. You can't even change it if you wanted to. right? And so that's what happens when you are resisting and you are afraid of change. You come to a point where you can't change it anymore, which is interesting. Only a few minutes left, so I think we're basically... final question, anyone? Anything? Well, that means we are on a break. Thank you, panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions.